The book is done. So the book about post-labor economics is done, but I want to talk about how we got here. If you remember a couple years ago, maybe about 3 years ago now, on my channel, I produced a video called Post-AGI Economics, and that rocketed to become my top video of all time, over 500,000 views. That gave me a clue that, hey, this is something that people care about and something that I'm thinking about that people really want to know. But then I kind of let it languish. You know, I revisited the topic every now and then. I got a tremendous amount of good feedback from all of you in my audience. Every time I came up with an idea, there was always someone or multiple people in the audience kind of pointing out my blind spots. And so there was, from the beginning, it was really an act of co-creation, but there was a turning point. So many of you remember about 18 months ago when I was in the depths of being incredibly burned out and, as it turns out, actually quite sick. I had a lot of GI issues. I announced that I was quitting AI. And of course, that was, we see how that aged. After about 6 months of starting to recover from honestly thinking that I was dying, and I was like, what is life for? Like, what do I actually care about? And I remember it was almost a year ago. It was about January 2025. I said, you know what? The thing that I really irrationally care about is post-labor economics. So I'm just going to double down and actually figure this out. And here we are a year later, 180,000 words later, and I have this book figured out. And it was not just my idea. Like I said, it was a complete act of co-creation. It was getting constant feedback from you, from my patrons, from people asking questions, from people pointing out gaps. And when I say like pointing out gaps, one of the most important directions that this book took, a few of you were constantly pointing out, Dave, you are focusing on supply side economics only. You need to look at the demand side. It was that constant feedback of saying like, hey, you're missing a big part of the equation, actually helped really dramatically shape the book as it is today. So thank you. But that's not where the whole picture started. The entire story started when I gave a talk at Clemson University, and the students were more concerned about their jobs and their future prospects than whether or not artificial intelligence could be aligned. At the time, I was still talking about artificial intelligence alignment and X-risk and safety. Me being mid-career and having a little bit of savings in my own house, I had a very different set of concerns than these undergrads and grad students who are facing the automation wave. And so they're like, you know, what should we study? I remember this was one of the primary questions that they asked, which is, what should we study so that we're going to be okay? And of course, like I had some generic answers. Like one of my go-to answers is social skills, communication skills, negotiation, that sort of thing. Far and away, the most valuable set of skills that you can have is the soft skills, particularly if you're in STEM, because you have any communication skills, that puts you in a league above most of your peers. And then I had the other generic answer, which is it doesn't matter what you study in school. The point of school is to learn to study and to learn, and that, like most people, I don't actually use the exact things that I learned in school. I learned Pascal and C++ in school. Never used it professionally. I used PowerShell. I used Python. And of course, the stuff that you use today didn't exist when you were in school. But of course, you know, people paying $20,000 a year or $30,000 a year, I don't know how much Clemson costs, they don't want to hear that their education is useless. So they were not happy with that answer. And honestly, I wasn't either, because they had genuine concerns. It's like the next logical step is you say, okay, if artificial intelligence is getting to the point where it could even potentially threaten humanity, even if we just accept that premise, then it's also intelligent enough to disrupt every power structure, the entire job market. And that ultimately was a far more interesting conversation to have. And that's what I've been focusing on for the last 18 months straight. Now I want to talk a little bit about what we're actually doing here and how it's going to play out, because this is the most important thing to understand, is that post-labor economics and labor zero are just ideas until they catch on, until they have mimetic saturation in the right conversations, the right people that are engaged and involved. Now, obviously, my YouTube channel, I've got almost 200,000 subscribers. Between YouTube, Twitter, Substack, I've got over 250,000 people, and I've got some of the right people paying attention to me. However, people often wonder, Dave, why don't you just publish it as a blog series? Why don't you just release it for free? And the reason is because a book is something that's a little bit different. When we talk about post-labor economics, unless you've watched 50 of my videos and read 150 blog posts, you're not really going to know what it is. And asking someone to say, hey, just look at this scattershot shotgun of content out there is not really the correct way to say, hey, we need to get university professors on the same page. We need to get politicians on the same page. We need to get millionaires and billionaires on the same page. We need to get voters on the same page. The best way to get everyone on the same page is to say, this book, read this one book, and that is the gold standard of what post-labor economics is. Like, I've done the work and you guys have been with me every step of the way. So it's not necessarily for us. It's not for me. It's not for you. If you have been following along for more than a year or two, you probably have a much better idea of post-labor economics than 99% of the people out there. But the purpose of the book and the purpose of launching a book like this is not so that 250,000 of my closest followers understand post-labor economics. It is for that. But the most important thing to build the Labor Zero movement and to build consensus is to prove to people, to prove to 1 million voters or 100 million voters and the right politicians and the right think tank people to demonstrate to them this is a new way to think about what's coming. That is really the goal. That is why I said a book is the most correct vehicle to do this. And that's why the very next step is getting this Kickstarter done so that we can get the book to the possible highest sheen. It needs to glow in the dark. It needs to be perfect. So that way anyone who reads it, whether it is, your conservative father-in-law, that's who I'm writing it for. That's my idealized reader, is my conservative father-in-law who's a smart guy, and I need to make sure that he understands what's coming. If I can convince him, then I can convince other voters. If I can convince other voters, then I can convince politicians and people that work for the government at the state level, at the federal level, and so on and so forth. That is really the gold standard of what we're going for. And it was a very, very deliberate, purpose-built mission. When I started working on this book, all I knew is that automation and robots and artificial intelligence was going to impact the job market. Now, of course, you have to be careful about putting the conclusion first. And of course, the conclusion here is it's going to eradicate all jobs. Now, of course, that requires a lot of research and unpacking and, trying to prove yourself wrong and that sort of thing. So I had to go through a lot of historical data, a lot of analogies, and it basically boils down to a few key insights or intuitions. So the first insight is that the economy is broken into 3 sectors. So there's the primary sector, which is extraction. So that's farming, that's mining, that's fishing, that's, timberland, that sort of thing. The primary sector is all the resources that nature gives you. The secondary sector is manufacturing. So this is where you take those primary goods and you turn them into products, right? So you have, you take iron ore and then you make it into steel, which becomes cars and buildings, and, you make concrete and that sort of stuff. And then the third sector, or the tertiary sector, is services. So that's what most of us are familiar with today as doctors, lawyers, even YouTubers. We're technically service sector. Now, historically, the primary sector was the biggest. For most of history, it was 90+% of the population were in primary industries. Then with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, that started to go away, and then we had the rise of the secondary sector. So that was, making all the clocks and gizmos and widgets, and now we have cars and iPhones and that sort of thing. But then around mid of the 20th century is the manufacturing sector started to decline as well. And if history is any pattern, then the tertiary sector will start to decline at some point in the future. And the data makes it look like that it started to plateau or peak around 2015, meaning we're at peak tertiary sector right now. The long game is that just as most people probably, if you went back 3 centuries and said, hey, do you think farming is ever going to go away as a main job? They'll be like, no, most people are farmers. That's how society works. If you told them in 1700 France or 1800 England, if you say, oh, by the way, by the year 2025, you're going to have less than 2% of the population is going to be in farming and mining, then they would have looked at you like you're crazy. They would have said, what are you talking about? That's not actually physically possible. Likewise, during the golden age of, what we now call America's Rust Belt, if you said in, 1968 Detroit, you said, by the way, Detroit is going to look like a post-apocalyptic wasteland in 60 years, they would have been like, are you crazy? This is the most like industrialized city on the planet. But again, that is how things shake out in the long run. So that's key intuition number one. There's lots and lots of other data about it, but the other key intuition is household income just comes from three buckets. That's wages, transfers, and capital. So let me clarify what those mean. Wages is obviously just your paycheck. It's you get paid to spend your time enriching someone else. That is what a wage is. Unless you're self-employed, in which case you're enriching yourself. But either way. So then transfers are any money that you get from the government. So that is negative income tax, that's UBI, that's, Social Security, that's welfare, that's SNAP benefits, anything that is a tax and spend or tax and redistribute policy. If the money comes from the government, it is called a transfer. And then the third bucket is capital. So capital is stocks, bonds, rental properties, businesses that you own, that sort of thing. All household income. Every single dollar that comes into a household comes from one of those three buckets. Well, with post-labor economics, the idea is that wages are going away. That is the definition, is that, all right, if you want a formal definition of post-labor economics, it is that human labor input is decoupled from economic output. That is the simplest definition. But when you decouple economic output from human labor inputs, by definition, wages go away. Now, whether or not they go to zero is not the point. The point is that wages do not become the primary source of household income. So that means that transfers and capital have to pick up the slack. Well, transfers are great, and lots of people talk about UBI, and they talk about universal basic capital and universal basic services and, all these other things, but those are all still fundamentally transfers. And this is the biggest intuition or the biggest insight that post-labor economics offers, is that, hey, guys, you're ignoring the entire other half of the equation, which is capital, boosting capital. And so when we say like, okay, well, it takes money to make money, how do we get more capital-based income into the family home? So that we can get household spending shored up, so that way consumer demand stays and aggregate demand stays, and we don't end up in a deflationary death spiral. So when you have these two balances, you have transfers on one side and capital on the other. That is two very large domains or segments of the economy that we can say, hey, let's figure out how to boost both of these. And that is kind of the beating heart of the book of post-labor economics. So here we are. The Kickstarter is live. And here's the thing, is that Kickstarter is not just about getting enough money to finish editing the book and, marketing it on Amazon. The Kickstarter itself is part of the marketing plan, is to make sure that people become aware of it, because there's nothing quite like a viral Kickstarter campaign to raise awareness. So what I really need you to understand as my audience and as the co-creators of this mission is that our job now is to boost the signal. And so that means we need to hit front page of Kickstarter. And the way that we do that is with the maximum number of backers. It's not necessarily the amount of money. The amount of money doesn't really matter. What really matters is how many backers and how fast they hit. Because then if we hit the front page of Kickstarter, then we get those viral snowball effects. Likewise, the same thing is going to happen in a few months. We're aiming for a hopefully July launch of the book. Of course, schedules are schedules, but this year, the book will launch on Amazon as paperback, hardback, audiobook, and digital. So we're going to do all four. And this is kind of like the make or break moment. And I have been like a nervous wreck over this, because what if it doesn't work? What if we don't succeed? What if nobody cares about post-labor economics? What if we just don't get the funding and then we have to bootstrap it? Or maybe even the launch just kind of completely falls flat. So this is where I really need all of your help. And when I say all of you, I mean literally all of you. We need to make sure that everyone knows about it. So even if you don't back the campaign, share it. Email it to all of your coworkers, all of your friends, all of your family, on any groups that you're on. If you're on Discord servers, if you're on subreddits, whatever, boosting the signal any way that you can would be great. Also, watching this video to the end is the number one thing that you can do to make sure that the YouTube algorithm boosts this video. So this is it. Also, I've got the blogs going out in real time. So Substack, Twitter, LinkedIn, I'm publishing it everywhere. If you go look at those, repost those, restack them, whatever, anything that you can do to help boost the signal, that is this is it. This is the go time. This is the make or break moment that will determine whether or not this project actually succeeds. Yeah, that's all I've got. This is now completely in your hands. I have carried it this far and I will get it across the finish line as best I can, but I literally cannot do it without your help. So thank you for being here.